everyone, welcome to the November 4th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast, and this is the Breeders' Cup edition of the show, as we will be previewing these Friday and Saturday Breeders' Cup races out at Del Mar. And Craig, we already filmed a bunch of stakes previews for DRF. You can find those on DRF's YouTube channel, the website. I'm sure they're also being put out on Twitter. So we filmed videos for, I believe, 8 of the 14 Breeders' Cup races. So we decided, rather than doing some straight handicapping, just going through the cards race by race, we're going to try to have a looser discussion about the races, and we're going to organize it into 3 major topics. We're going to start out by talking about some notable pace scenarios in races that could feature some duels on the front end, or races that don't just feature a lot of speed at all. We'll talk about how that might impact some results of the different Breeders' Cup races where pace is likely to have an impact. Then we'll talk about some vulnerable favorites that Craig and I will be trying to beat, some short-priced horses that maybe you could try to fade or just leave out of some of your multi-race wagers. And then the final section, we're going to highlight some long shots, horses that we want to press either in multi-race wagers or exotics, not necessarily our top picks, but just some big prices that might be able to get into the mix. So Craig, looking forward to discussing all of these Breeders' Cup races with you.
Yeah, as we discussed beforehand, this is the last show, at least for me. I think you have a little more to do of what's been a busy week, but the Breeders' Cup is always great, and I can't get enough talking about it. Looking forward to the races on Friday and Saturday, and I do think there are some really interesting races from a betting perspective.
Let's start out with the discussion of the different pace scenarios that could have a major impact on the results Breeders' Cup weekend. And let's begin with Saturday, Craig, really at the end of the day, because I think there are 3 races that conclude that Saturday card where pace is going to be a significant factor. And let's begin with the big race on Saturday, the Classic. This is one that I know we already talked about when we did the stakes preview, but this is one of the more interesting pace scenarios of the weekend, as you have Knicks Go as the morning line favorite. We'll see whether he or Essential Quality ends up being the favorite in this spot. But Knicks Go, he's not going to get his usual free ride on the front end in this race.
No, I wouldn't think he would as well. He's going to face the Kentucky Derby winner and Medina Spirit. Hot Rod Charlie has been very fast in some of his races, and he's adding blinkers back on, which will probably make him a little more keen. Not that he has to be a front runner, but I imagine he's not going to be very far off. And even beyond that, you have horses like Art Collector, who though on our pace projector is shown pretty far back, his best efforts have come right up on the pace, so I can't imagine that they're going to be content to sit back in 4th or 5th place. Same with even a horse like Max Player, who maybe he's not fast enough to keep up, but he's been up close recently, so a lot of jockey strategy is going to come into play in this race.
Yeah, I think the start of this race is going to be really interesting to watch. Who breaks alertly, is able to get that forward position. Because like you said, I think there are a lot of horses that want to be forward in this race. I would imagine that most of them don't have illusions that they're going to make the lead over Knicks Go, because Knicks Go is just such a naturally fast horse, and he quickly is able to establish an advantage in most of his races he's competing in. But there are plenty that are going to try to apply that pressure. And the one that you highlighted that I think is going to have the biggest impact is Medina Spirit. Like you were pointing out, and we talked about this race earlier, Bob Baffert's not afraid to tell his jockeys to send their horses aggressively, and Medina Spirit has clearly run his best races when he's able to make the front end. So if Knicks Go is not as sharp out of the gate as usual, or if they're not as aggressive as they typically are, Medina Spirit's going to be right on top of him in the early going. So we'll see if that sort of percolates into a duel in the early going, because that would definitely work in the favor of a horse like Essential Quality.
Yeah, for sure. And even a horse like Hot Rod Charlie, I think, would appreciate a speed duel in front of him. He does have good tactical speed, but I think he would be the one most likely to sit a pocket trip and kind of take over if Medina Spirit and Knicks Go knock each other out. And in addition, we've talked about Knicks Go, and I do think he'll make the lead, but he's going to be hard pressed, and he's got that one question mark of never having been 10 furlongs, so we're not sure if he can handle that. Some others in here have proved they can, so definitely some question marks for me. And like you said, I'm going to be just as interested in watching this race through the stretch the first time as I am the second, because that could very well be where the race is decided.
The other dirt race that figures to have a contested pace late in that Saturday card at Del Mar is the Distaff, which has run just 2 races before the Classic. And Craig, it's kind of a similar situation with Knicks Go, though a little bit different because Latruska has overcome competitive paces in the past. But, we're looking at the TimeformUS pace projector of this Distaff, and it's a little surprising to see that Latruska is actually not shown on the early lead. She's actually shown between a couple of other horses, one of those being Private Mission on the rail, and Horologist, who's drawn 1 slot outside of her. We'll see if Irad is aggressive enough to secure the lead with Latruska. She has stalked effectively in the past, but she does seem like a horse that really gets fired up when she's able to make the lead and try to hold on to it.
Yeah, I would think that has to be the strategy with her. I mean, she hasn't proven to be able to come from off the pace and win. She ran okay at Oaklawn in the Azeri when she lost to She Dares the Devil. But at the end of the day, she lost that race to a horse she has since come back to beat a couple times while on the lead. So I think the strategy with her does have to be to go. But I don't think it's going to be easy. Horologist has been in really good form. Her best race came at Saratoga in that Summer Colony Stakes when she actually went right to the front, ran a big figure that day before getting nipped at the wire. No, she actually won that day. The time before she went really fast and just got beat late by Royal Flag in the Shoe V. Last time she went a little bit slower, wasn't able to hold on over Royal Flag. So I would imagine the plan with her is to go as well because her best races have been on the front end. There's others in here. She Dares the Devil is one shown a little bit further back. But she's one who's done her best running up near the front. I think she'd be more of a tracker. The real wild card for me is the Bob Baffert trained once again Private Mission. She draws the rail. She has shown she can sit a little bit off the pace, but her best running has come up on the front. And it's hard to think that from the rail, she's not going to be pushed to go. And I really think she is probably the main danger to the lead for Latruska.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds because we know about Latruska that she can go fast up front and still finish a race. We saw that in the Personal Ensign when she took all that pressure in the early going and seemed like the closers are ranging up like they might swallow her up at the top of the stretch, but she just fought so hard to hold them off. So I think that might give Latruska's connections a little bit of confidence to ride her aggressively like they did in that race. So we'll see if she makes the front end here. I would imagine that's going to be the plan, provided that she breaks cleanly. But Craig, this is a race where it does seem like the pace could heat up even if Latruska makes the lead. And the horse that I think would benefit most from that is Royal Flag. She is one of these horses that loves to see pace up front, and she's got a big late kick on her. So she's a horse that's coming into this race in great form, and we'll see if she gets enough pace to come out on in the winner's circle.
Yeah, she was really impressive last time out winning that Beldame. The pace wasn't even that hot that Horologist set, and she just flew by her and drew away to win by 4 lengths. She's been running right in that 120 TimeformUS speed figure, and if a horse like Latruska were to falter at all due to early pressure, it's not like she has a huge advantage. She's run one race where or a couple races where she ran a better speed figure in the mid 120s, but she's also got a string of similar 120s as well. So if she softened up at all, I do think Royal Flag is the main danger. Some people might argue with you that maybe Malathot is the horse to beat if the pace gets hot up front. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on her.
Well, she's another one of these horses that's going to have to adapt to coming from a little bit further off the pace than maybe she has in her last couple of starts because she just figures to face a faster early tempo than she has encountered in her last 2 races at Saratoga. I do think that Malathot is a really nice 3-year-old. I think she's the best 3-year-old in this race, but it's a big step up. Latruska has just been running faster speed figures. I think you could say the same for Royal Flag, who arguably might simply be a better closer than Malathot, and she's going to be a bigger price than Malathot as well. I don't discount the possibility that Malathot still has upside. Watching her recent workouts, it appears that she's coming into this race in top form. She just has to step up, whereas Royal Flag has already run that competitive speed figure.
And I think another that we should probably talk about before moving on is She Dares the Devil. I mean, she's the second choice on the morning line. She's proven that she's been able to track. She actually split decisions with Latruska. She has beaten her when she outran her early. I wasn't on the lead, but she was ahead of Latruska. Actually, she did go wire to wire in that Oaklawn race. And You know, I feel like maybe she's getting a little bit overlooked by the betting public and the people that I saw, though the morning line doesn't say that. I'd be surprised if she's actually only 4-1. I think she may go off a little bit higher in here.
No, I think that she'll probably be somewhere around the same price as Royal Flag in here at a bigger price, and Malathaat's going to be the clear second choice. I imagine they'll bet it that way, and I think that they should. I've never been the biggest fan of She Dares the Devil. I thought that she was somewhat opportunistic when she beat Latruska earlier in the year when they tried out those rating tactics with Latruska. Since then, I just haven't been thrilled with She Dares the Devil's recent races. She did run a big speed figure at Del Mar, but her last race at Churchill just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. She had to work way too hard to beat some inferior runners, so I just don't know where she is right now coming into what is the toughest race that she'll be facing all season.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to say that speed figure is a little shaky if you look at the run backs. The top three in that race have all regressed a little bit speed figure-wise since then.
Craig, we should also talk about the race that's sandwiched right in between the Distaff and the Classic. That's the Breeders' Cup Turf, and normally this wouldn't be a race that we talk about with pace having a big impact, because horses going this marathon mile-and-a-half distance, they typically aren't coming out to be that aggressive in the early going, but this is the rare Breeders' Cup Turf where we have two confirmed frontrunners who seemed like they're destined to inevitably hook up on the front end.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine they wouldn't. I guess it's just going to come down to how stubborn they are, or if they just kind of are content to run next to each other without going too fast. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's pretty obvious that Tribuvan and Acclimate are going to go out and set the pace, and I think it's going to be a quick one because that's what they do. It's not like either one has a history of going to the front and running blue fractions in the TimeformUS PPs for setting a moderate pace. Their PPs are just limited or littered with the red fraction, so it's hard to imagine any other scenario but those two going out to the front and going fast.
Yeah, and another horse that's probably going to be trying to press them early is Walton Street. I know he's shown a little bit further back on the pace projector, but if you watch his prior races, he's a horse that really does like when a race turns into a true test of stamina because he tries to stay up close to the pace, and maybe he'd be the one that would be the first to take over if Tribuvan and Acclimate go too fast on the front end. I'm not saying that I like Walton Street in this race. I just think expect him to be pressing those horses as well. And, a fast pace, that's going to play right into the hands of the favorite here, Tarnawa. She comes from the back of the pack, and she'll definitely be finishing strongly if they go quickly up front.
Yeah, for sure. I think it plays right into the hands of the Euro shippers. There's several in here. Tarnawa is obviously the most accomplished, but it could come down to trips. Usually a fast pace like this will kind of gap out the field a bit, and maybe trips won't be as big a problem as they usually are in a 14-horse field, but it still could be a timing thing where you have to time your move right. You don't want to go too soon if the pace gets fast. I don't think anybody's going to take the two front runners too seriously as win contenders for the race, but you do got to plot when you're going to make that move and maybe get the jump on some others, but risk moving too early.
Yeah, I think the horse that arguably has the most difficult task with regard to the pace is Domestic Spending, because stamina is a big question for him as he's stretching out from 1.25 miles for the first time. And I think it's a difficult thing. Maybe a slow pace might actually work into the hands of a horse stretching out better, because then the race would just turn into a sprint to the wire, and you can almost trick the horse into running a 1.5 mile race like it's a 1.25 mile race. When these races going a 1.5 miles go quickly up front and turn into a real test of stamina, I think it almost works against the horses like Domestic Spending with a big turn of foot. So I wonder how he's going to be affected by that. We'll see. He definitely has a lot of talent, but he's got that big distance question to answer. Craig, I know we also like some long shots in this race, but let's get to that in the last section, because I want to talk about some other pace scenarios before we move on. A race early in the day on Saturday that I think is going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds in the early going is the Dirt Mile. And I know that Life is Good is coming into this race as a heavy favorite, but for a horse that's going to be such a short price, I've got some big questions about how he's going to deal with all the pressure he's likely to face for the lead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we're talking about a horse who's never not been in front in the early stages of a race, and Life is Good, and really has only been behind once, and that was towards the end to Jackie's Warrior. He's obviously really quick, but he's going to face some real pressure in here. it's pretty muddled with Jasper Prince as far as form goes. He ran in the Breeders' Cup. I think it was back in 2019, not the 2020 version. No, it was 2020, last year. And he opened up on the field really quickly, showing just super high speed. He had a 2-length lead after a quarter mile with a 1:45 pace figure. So stretching out to a mile, it's hard to imagine that he's not going to give Life is Good all he wants trying to make the front end.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird situation with the Japanese horses in this race because the same trainer, Hideyuki Mori, has entered 2 horses in this race. Jasper Prince, that long shot that you mentioned, but also Pingshong, who, if you look up his races in Japan, he is a confirmed frontrunner as well. So both of these horses are probably going to be going for the lead. We'll see if Pingshong is quite as fast as Jasper Prince, who, as you mentioned, we saw last year in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. He's got a really fast quarter mile in him if they want to use it at the start of this race. But also, what are they going to do with Ginobili, who maybe he's not as quick for that opening quarter as horses like Jasper Prince and Life is Good, but you know that Ginobili can run a really fast second quarter and kind of open up a race midway through, so he could be another thorn in the side of Life is Good.
Yeah, for sure he could. He's had success sprinting. He was able to win the Pat O'Brien, sitting just off what was a really solid pace, and running that same natural speed, going a mile around 2 turns, would put him very close to horses like Life is Good and Jasper Prince. And I'm sure he's not going to be content to just sit and try to pass in the last furlong or so. So even if he's not up front soon at the beginning, I would think he's going to press somewhere on the backstretch.
Yeah, it's a fascinating race. Going into it, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily looking to pick against Life is Good, but the more that I just kind of dissected this pace situation, I couldn't resist picking Silver State on top. He's just a horse that seems like the race is going to fall right in his lap if he's able to show up. I don't think that Silver State has that kind of 130 plus TimeformUS speed figure in him like we've seen Life is Good can produce, but I wonder if Life is Good is going to be able to run that kind of number with all that pressure up front, and I just think Silver State is going to get the perfect pace situation. We'll see if he's good enough, but he'll be the second choice, but a much bigger price than Life is Good, so I kind of just couldn't resist taking a horse that's going to get that kind of trip.
Yeah, and one other horse I wanted to mention was 8 Rings. I don't really think he's a contender in here, but he's yet another Bab Baffert trainee with speed who's done all of his best work when he's on the front end. So, including winning the American Pharaoh back as a 2-year-old, and he won a really nice allowance with a good speed figure on the front end. So it's not like he's going to be content to sit in 3rd or 4th either. I think he's going to try to at least contest the pace.
Craig, a really interesting pace scenario that I think has not gotten that much attention is the race that's taking place right after the Dirt Mile, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. And if you're looking at the TimeformUS PPs, you might notice that there is no pace projector for this race. And Craig, as you can explain, that's because there just are so many European runners in here, or overseas runners, I should say, that they're just, you can't make a pace projector based on 5 or 6 Americans because we don't have pace data on all of those Europeans. But looking through this race, I do not see very much speed at all.
No, I don't see any at all either. We have one horse from the U.S. listed as a leader, and I would imagine she is going to be the leader. That's Going to Vegas. She set the pace winning the Grade 1 Rodeo Drive last time. I don't think that was a true Grade 1 race, but she at least was up on the front end, clear, was able to hold on late. She's been near the front in most of her races, so yeah, it's hard to see where else the pressure is going to come from, because when you scroll through the American horses, there's not a lot of speed. When you read the Timeform comments and watch some replays of the European shippers, there's even less speed, really. So I don't know what to expect here. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw a 50 half in a race like this.
Yeah, this is a race that I thought was going to be a little more straightforward to handicap, because you do have some real classy fillies and mares in here that look like they're maybe a cut above the rest. But that pace situation is kind of sticking in the back of my mind, and I'm wondering how it's going to affect some of the favorites, particularly Warlike Goddess, who does not have very much early speed. She's going to try to pass most of the field from her position in the early going, and I wonder about that, because doing it over a mile and 3/8 when they just walk on the front end, these races can turn into a sprint to the wire, and I don't know that that's really going to play into Warlike Goddess's hands, and she's likely to be a short price in this race. I imagine she will be the favorite, so that bothers me a little bit, and that led me to pick against her in this race. But I really don't know who's going to get the right trip outside of Going to Vegas, who I'm just not sure is good enough.
Yeah, it's hard to say. As you say, Warlike Goddess has won her last two, but she doesn't have overwhelming speed figures. She actually won her last four, but her last two in stakes races at Saratoga. And in both of those, she got a lot of pace to run into. Now, she did have some pretty decent tactical speed in the last one in the Flower Bowl. She was just 3 lengths back after, I believe it's at the mile marker, but I think she would prefer to have some pace. When the pace is slow, I think that is a big question for her. So I'm not sure I want to take a short price on her. Out kicking some really nice Euros in this field.
Yeah, and I mean, looking through these Euro horses, I mean, the one that might have the best tactical speed is Love. She can be placed relatively close to the pace, and I know she took the lead from a long way out when she won that Prince of Wales back at Royal Ascot. So it's good that she does have that gear where she can be relatively close to going to Vegas as long as she breaks cleanly. The other European that I think is getting somewhat overlooked, that I didn't quite pull the trigger on making her my top pick. I picked her second in this race, but I do want to give her a shout out, is last year's winner, Audaria. I feel like she's going to get let go at a bit of a price in this race. Might drift up from that 5-1 morning line a little bit because she's drawn that far outside post position, but she's got some tactical speed of her own. I know she came from off the pace when she won this last year, but since then in her European races, especially last time out in that Prix de l'Opera, she was relatively close to what was a really honest pace, and I thought she actually might have run the best race that day because that completely fell apart at the end. So don't be surprised if she's a bit closer to the pace as well. But it is kind of a guessing game to figure out who's going to get the right trip in this race. Let's move on to one more race that we should talk about with regard to pace, and that's a race from Friday's card. It is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And Craig, this is one that's going to be fascinating because the two horses that people are expecting to hook up on the front end are bookending the field, drawn on the rail and in the far outside 12 post, those being Jack Christopher and Corniche, both undefeated colts coming into this 2-for-2 in their careers. It's going to be a tough task for Mike Smith and Corniche, though, to be able to get over from that outside and really give Jack Christopher a challenge into the first turn.
Yeah, I don't think Jack Christopher is a need to lead horse. I mean, he never really has led early. He sat just off the pace. But from that rail draw, I think he pretty much has to go because there are some pretty quick horses in between those two. And I also think Corniche has to go. He's drawn far outside. You don't want to get hung far out on the turn. It's not the longest run in the world at 1 1/16 at Del Mar, so there's not a lot of time. So I would imagine both of these two are going to be going, and they're not going to be, the pace isn't going to be moderate. The more intriguing part for me is who's going to add to it. I mean, we have a wild card and a Japanese horse. Who knows what that horse is going to do? I know we put the replay on Twitter in our preview. We only saw the stretch run, but it looked like he was up front for a good portion of the race. And there's some other horses with some speed as well. The other Bob Baffert horses, Barossa has shown speed. Pinehurst went wire to wire to win the Del Mar Futurity. I'm not sure that they would be asked to go, knowing with that Corniche is to their outside. I'm sure Bob Baffert will have a strategy for all his horses, but it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people comparing Jack Christopher to Jackie's Warrior in last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and I don't know if that comparison quite tracks for me. I mean, they do have their names starting with the same 4 letters, and they both won the Champagne last time, but I mean, aside from that, Jackie's Warrior faced an unusually fast opening pace in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. I would not be expecting to see a pace nearly as fast as that race because that was historically fast for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but I do think they'll be going an honest clip up front.
Yeah, for sure. And in the end, I think the one most hurt by the draw, of course, is Corniche from the 12 hole because he is really going to have to work to get over. And even then, I don't know that he can get in front of Jack Christopher. Maybe he's just one of these Bob Baffert freaks that has a lot more in the tank than what we've seen in his first 2 races. He's won pretty easily, ran 108 speed figures, but not only is Jack Christopher fast and have the advantage, he's run some pretty historically fast races for a 2-year-old in his first 2 starts. I haven't done the research. I'll try to get to it this week. But I bet I would be hard-pressed to find a horse that's run 2 speed figures that fast the first 2 times out.
Craig, I know we did our stakes preview about this race, which people can check out, and you made the case for Command Performance getting the right trip in this race and maybe just improving anyway at the distance. But aside from Command Performance, who we both agree on, if this pace really does heat up, did you see anybody else in this juvenile that might be able to capitalize, or are there just too many inferior runners that are not going to be able to get into the mix because they're too slow?
I mean, as a vertical player, I would be looking at a couple long shots in here. I would say one is the Bob Baffert trained Barossa. He's at 10-1 on the morning line. I'm not sure how big of a long shot he's going to be, but I really liked what I saw last time out. His speed figure jumped up 18 points when he broke his maiden to a 110. He was fairly close to the early pace, but I think that's a little deceiving. You often see that in maiden races where a lot of the horses just aren't very good. I would expect him to be more a mid-pack type. And then another horse I don't think I actually mentioned on the preview, but if I were playing trifectas and superfectas, which I very well may in a spot like this, I think the 3 Oviac Class is a horse who is the one horse you can be sure is going to be running late in this field. He is a confirmed closer. He should appreciate a hot pace up front. He didn't really get that in the American Pharaoh, and he was still making up significant ground late. So I don't really think he's a win contender, but I would definitely use him in third and fourth slots in tries and supers.
Yeah, I think that horse for me at a big price to get in underneath in tries and supers would be the number 6 American Sanctuary. Like you were saying, if you look at my top 4 picks on the preview, I left this horse out. But he's a long shot that I think might be able to get into the mix underneath. I don't want to be too hard on the previous rider, but let's just say this horse did not get the best trips in his last couple of races, especially last time in the Breeders' Futurity when it just seemed like he was choosing the wrong path at every turn, got steadied multiple times. He ran a much better race that day than Double Thunder, another horse in this race with a similar running style. And American Sanctuary is going to be a gigantic price. So he's the kind of horse that if he gets in there at 40-1 for third, could really make a trifecta pay. Let's move on to the next section of our discussion, Craig, and that is vulnerable favorites, horses that are going to be short prices throughout this 2-day festival and ones that we might be trying to beat. And I want to start off the discussion with a really polarizing horse that will be the key to a lot of people's early multi-race wagers on Saturday, Craig, and that's Gamine in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, the first Breeders' Cup race of that Saturday card, and I think you can look at her two ways. It's a pretty small field. Maybe she's not the same Gamine that she once was, but it's not like she's facing a particularly tough assignment here. And I mean, we'll see. There's only one other real speed horse that's supposed to challenge her, so maybe she has another cakewalk on the front end. Does that track for you, or are you trying to beat her?
I'll probably try to beat her. As you said, though, I think there's only one horse that can beat her. I was really disappointed in this field, as I'm sure most people will. It's down the 5 with the scratch of the 2 horse and Estilo Talentoso. But I think Bella Sofia is the real deal. She draws outside, which I think is a bit of an advantage. Maybe she can just outrun Gamine early. She certainly has shown the speed to hang with almost any horse in training. And if not, she could sit just off her flank and really put pressure on her throughout the race. In those kind of spots, I always tend to prefer the outside horse in a sprint race. So I think Bella Sofia's got a real shot. It won't shock me if Gamine returns to that form. I mean, last year she wasn't running gigantic speed figures on TimeformUS, and then she got to the Filly and Mare sprint and ran off the charts, ran a 132 TimeformUS, chasing the very fast Serengeti Empress and just putting her away and drawing off. So it won't shock me, but to me, this just hasn't seemed like the same Gamine we saw last year, so I'll probably take a shot against her if we can actually get anything near 5-2 on Bella Sofia.
Yeah, for me, this really is a 2-horse race. I don't really see the scenario in which CC wins. I don't anticipate the top 2 are going to hook up to an extent that it falls apart for CC, so I really do view it as a contest between the 2 outside drawn fillies, Gamine and Bella Sofia, and it's kind of cool to have these 2 be the main protagonists in the race, Craig, because Gamine is this $1.8 million yearling by top sire in the land Into Mischief, and Bella Sofia is this horse that comes from humble beginnings, a $20,000 yearling by awesome patriot who I think stands in Ohio, has no other major runners on the national circuit. So it's just kind of funny to see the different backgrounds on these two horses. And for me, Bella Sophia, it's just so easy to root for her because, I mean, she's just come out of nowhere. She was a big surprise in her debut. She's run fast basically in every start of her career. No, she hasn't posted those 130 plus Timeform speed figures like we saw from Gamine in this race last year. But like you were saying, Gamine has not looked quite the same this year. Even watching her race in training on XBTV, I mean, go back and compare some of her recent workouts to the Gamine that we saw coming into the filly and mare sprint last year. To me, there's a slight difference. She just doesn't look like she's quite as sharp, quite as eager in the morning. So I think there are some chinks in the armor of Gamine. And, Bella Sophia with Louis Saez aboard, he's going to be aggressive from that outside post. I don't think Gamine's going to be handed any easy leads here. And I think Bella Sophia is the real deal. And like you, that 5-2 feels like value to me. Let's move on to another race from Saturday, going a sprint distance, where I think Craig and I are both against a favorite, to maybe the slightly different extents, but that's in the turf sprint, where Golden Pal is listed as 7-2 on the morning line. Craig, we'll see how short he ultimately goes off, because this is a pretty wide open race, but it does feel like most people do regard Golden Pal as the horse to beat coming in here, and this one has a lot to prove for Wesley Ward as a 3-year-old stepping up against older horses, because it's not like his speed figures point him out as being all that formidable.
No, there's definitely several horses in here who have run faster. He's a 3-year-old. He's basically improving every single time out outside that race at York where he just didn't run at all, facing a horse from this race actually in there who ran second that day. But I mean, do I think he'll run well? I do think I'm sure he's going to show up. He's going to be part of the pace. I doubt he's going to drop anchor and finish near the back. But I think he's got some real challenges in here, and they're going to come throughout the race, not just early. So I think he's not necessarily a toss, but I think he's a favorite you want to try to beat.
Yeah, and that's where we differ a little bit. For me, Golden Pal is a toss. I mean, I didn't love this horse's win last time. I was bothered by the way that Firecrow kind of ranged up alongside him at the top of the stretch, and Golden Pal really had to be put to way more pressure than I think people anticipated to put that one away and hang on for the victory that day. He's got to step up and run a faster race, and I know there's not a ton of speed signed on, and that might work in his favor, but I know you and I agree, Craig, that Lieutenant Dan to his outside just seems like he's a faster horse. I think he's going to be able to potentially take the lead from Golden Pal when it really counts at the quarter pole. And if he puts Golden Pal away, kind of like we saw happen in the Nunthorpe, I'm not convinced that Golden Pal is going to fight back. He might just fall apart. So I would try to get him out of there completely, because I think there are so many other horses that you can point to as having value. I'll get to one that I really like at a big price a little bit later in this podcast. But yeah, this is one, Craig, if I'm playing an early sequence, I would just try to beat Golden Pal, and I'd be happy to lose if he wins.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that point of view. I'm with you on Lieutenant Dan. It's hard to see a scenario where he doesn't run a really good race in here. He drew well. I like him being outside of Golden Pal. If he outruns him early, great. If he doesn't, he can sit right on his flank and kind of take over later. So in our preview, he was a horse I went with the top pick, and I think 6-1 would be real value on him. I'll turn it over to you to talk about your long shot, who you've also kind of sold me on during our preview. So have at it.
I'm going to get to her in a little bit as we go through the races to talk about all the long shots that we do like. So maybe fast forward to the end of the podcast for that. But I do want to just mention a couple of other favorites, Craig, and other races that we might be trying to go against. We already talked about the Classic. I think that we have made it pretty clear that we would both try to take a stand against Nick's Go. Maybe you a little bit more dramatically than I am. I did pick him, I think, third in the race. But he is a horse that is going to be facing a difficult pace situation. And as the favorite, I know we're both trying to beat him. As for that dirt mile that we already talked about, the pace of, I don't know if you said it or not. Would you be trying to beat Life is Good in this race, or do you think he's just too talented for this field?
You know, this was a race we didn't do a preview for, and I asked you about it while we were all fair, just because I wanted to get your opinion, and I think you made some really good points. We talked about it on the pace scenario. It's always a dangerous proposition to take a horse who's never not been on the lead when there's a real chance he won't be on the lead this time. We have him shown slightly back, and it's just kind of iffy for me. And I think Irad Ortiz is a very, very good rider, but he's not the most aggressive rider on dirt. So it wouldn't surprise me if he took back off the lead a little bit. And I'm going to try to beat him just like you. I'm not sure exactly who with. I mean, it does seem like Silver State would be the obvious horse. He's got the right running style. He's been solid all year. He loves winning races, so I certainly won't knock that pick. But I haven't handicapped this one in depth to see if maybe Ginobili, I think, could give him a run. It would be a little hard for me to go with an extreme long shot in here because I just don't think they're good enough. But those two have shown that they can run fast races in top competition.
I think we've mostly covered the big favorites on Saturday's card. There is one race from Friday that I do want to get your take on, Craig, and that is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. And in that Breeders' Cup pick 5 that does comprise all 5 Breeders' Cup races, feels like this one, with Echo Zulu being the 4-5 morning line favorite, is the race that a lot of people might be tempted to key around. How do you view Echo Zulu coming into this race? Because she is stretching out around 2 turns for the first time. There's been some weird things going on with the Asmussen barn being extremely cold and Ricardo Santana getting taken off the horse. What do you make of all that? And do you think Echo Zulu is vulnerable here?
I think Echo Zulu is going to run fine, but I don't think she's a cinch that the morning line would make you believe at 4-5, because what's wrong with Juju's Map? I mean, she has done absolutely nothing wrong. She's been around 2 turns. She's even been around 1.5 turns at Ellis Park. She's run just as fast as Echo Zulu had. She's run, I would say, just as fast early even. That last time out, we had the early fractions coded in red when she was sitting in second. So I don't think this is a one-horse race at all. I think Juju's Map is the real deal, and I really liked her Alcibiades.
Yeah, we're on the same page about that one, Craig. If I had to make a best bet on Friday's card, it would be Juju's Map. Her last race in the Alcibiades was really impressive. That was a fast pace for the opening couple of fractions. A horse kind of ran off on the lead. She wanted to go up with her, but she rated kindly enough under Florent Giroux. And when she took that race over, I mean, she just slammed the door on the other speeds. That race completely fell apart behind her, and she was still galloping strongly to the wire. She strikes me as the one out of the 3 favorites here that really is cut out to go these 2-turn distances. And she seems like a horse to me that's still going to be a player in this division when we get to the Kentucky Oaks next year. Whereas I'm not sure that's necessarily the case with Echo Zulu. I don't think we really know yet what she is, if she's just a miler, if she was just a precocious 2-year-old. But Juju's Map, she strikes me as one that's going to go on in distance, and that's still getting better. And I mean, it's not like that Alcibiades came out of nowhere, because if you want to go back and watch a really impressive tape, go look at the replay of her maiden victory at Ellis Park 2 back. You'll not see a horse win easier than she did that day. And I mean, you can certainly trust in the connections with Brad Cox at the helm. So I like Juju's Map quite a bit in this Juvenile Fillies. And if she's 5-2 to Echo Zulu being odds on, I just think that's fantastic value on her.
Yeah, the real wild card in here for me is Hidden Connection. She's just absolutely galloped in her first 2 races, won by a combined 16.5 lengths. But she hasn't run particularly fast doing it. These kind of always give me trouble, but she's going to take money in here. So I would much prefer Juju's Map, but it wouldn't surprise me if Hidden Connection ran very well in here and actually was able to finish ahead of a horse like Echo Zulu. So not so much Juju's Map, but I think she's a good one as well, but she's just a really tough horse to get a read on this soon.
All right, Craig, let's move on to the final section of this podcast and just go through the races and highlight some long shots that we think are interesting. Some of them we've already mentioned, but we can rehash a little bit. And again, not necessarily horses that we're always picking on top, but just ones that we think will be able to get in there and might offer some value, whether you're playing vertically or horizontally. So we were on Friday, so let's start with Friday, and then we'll move on to Saturday, Craig. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. I know this is one we already talked about, but I think this is a race where you might be able to go get a little creative. How did you see it?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go in here. I decided to go with one of the Euros in Armor. He's 6-1. I'm not sure if we want to consider that a long shot or not, but I think he's got a definite shot in here. I'm just not as sold on the contingent Wesley Ward is sending out. I mean, Averly Jane, she's fine, but she's kind of had things her own way. As you mentioned on our preview, she was kind of a throw-in to even try the turf. She had stuck to dirt. So I'm going to try to beat her in verticals. I may look for some others. I know you like this horse, Go Bears Go. So I'll let you expand on him a little bit more. But I think he's a long shot that could definitely hit the board in here.
Yeah, I like two long shots in this race, a couple of horses with similarly patterned names, Go Bears Go and Run Curtis Run. Go Bears Go is obviously the one that drew the much better post position down in stall number 3. Of the Euros, I just think he's the one that might really appreciate this turn back to 5 furlongs. I liked his races early in his career, going those 5 furlongs over a straightaway in Europe. I just think as the distance is kind of stretched out and he had to use more stamina, it showed his vulnerability in Europe. He just doesn't want to go that far. I think he just never really had a chance to be competitive in that Dewhurst last time, but turning back to the 5, I think is going to work for this horse. He's got plenty of tactical speed, so I'm anticipating him getting a decent trip under John Velasquez. And Run Curtis Run, he's listed as I think the co-longest price on the morning line at 20-1. Not a great post, obviously drawing all the way outside in number 12, but his futurity last time, I was really impressed by that effort. If you go back and watch that race, they went really quick on the front end. He got engaged in a duel with a horse that he put away early. That horse faded to finish nowhere. The race was totally dominated by closers, except for Run Curtis Run, who battled back in the late stages. And that 101 TimeformUS speed figure puts him right in line with Averly Jane's last number. So I think he's a long shot that might be able to keep in there, but obviously he's going to have to work out a trip. Greg, I think we already covered the juvenile fillies. Obviously, we both like Juju's Map. I would not anticipate that's a race where you want to get too creative with long shots, given the small field. So let's move on to the juvenile fillies turf, a race that I know we haven't really discussed that much yet. This is another just completely wide open affair where I think if you want to, you can make a case for some prices.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to look to the Euro horses in there. One of them's a horse named Cachet, who's coming over for a trainer I'm not familiar with. I guess it's George Bowie is how you would say it. But I kind of liked what I saw. She's coming out of a race that was on yielding turf where she didn't quite run as well as it looked like she had in the prior terms. But I like that she handled firm turf. I like that she draws an inside post. She gets Luis Saez. And in a wide open race like this, I just don't want any short prices. So that's the one I'm going to start with.
Yeah, there are a couple of horses that are interesting to me that are listed at double digits. One of them is that same horse that you mentioned, Cachet. I think there's a lot to like about her. I know she's by a sire in Europe that's generally regarded as throwing more sprinters, but there's stamina on the bottom side, and I think watching her races, she's actually been improving as the distances have stretched out. Throw out that race at Long Shop 3 back going a mile because she completely botched the start that day. She had to rush up in the early going. That was just an effort you kind of want to disregard, but I liked her race in the Phillies Mile last time, staying on at the end. I thought she stayed on gamely 2 back in the Rockfell. And Craig, I think you agree with me on this. I always like when the European connections come over and choose to use an American rider, especially an aggressive one like Luis Saez, because this horse has some tactical speed, and I think she's going to be able to work out a decent trip.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the things that drew me to it. I like the American rider, and from an inside post on this Delmore course, you cannot be timid. You have to go and establish that position early because it's really tough to work out a trip where you're going to be able to swing out late and make up ground. The stretch isn't very long, and you got to begin your move a little bit early. So being inside and being forwardly placed is a big advantage.
Yeah, the other horse that really interests me in this race that I don't know how big of a price she's going to be because I've seen a lot of people liking her, but that's the number 11 Haughty. I just have not been thrilled with some of the preps that we've seen stateside for this race. I don't think that the Jessamine was a good race or the Surfer Girl or really the Miss Grillo. So I'm interested in a horse that's coming out of a different direction. And I know Haughty's coming out of a pair of maiden races, but she has been so visually impressive in both of those wins. I still am kind of reeling from that DQ first time out because I thought she was much the best that day, and she was fairly interesting at 9-1. But she has just been a dominant winner of both races. And when Chad Brown takes a horse like this and places them so aggressively in the juvenile fillies turf just off a maiden victory, I think you have to take notice. So she's pretty interesting to me as well.
Yeah, and she got a 93 speed figure that day, which is a little below the rest, but it's one of those cases where she won so easily and the gap is big. We've talked about it before. A 4-length gap on the turf is more like 6 or 7 on the dirt. It's one of the rare cases where I would say she probably had more in the tank than that 93 speed figure would indicate.
Craig, was there anything else you wanted to mention from these Friday races? I know we pretty much went over the long shots we like in the juvenile already. We did a stakes preview on the juvenile turf, which closes out the day, but I know we both landed in somewhat logical directions there. Did you, even though it looks like a wide open race, I think there are some horses that will be among the shorter prices who look pretty solid. So were there any more horses you wanted to touch upon on Friday, or can we move on to Saturday?
Now let's move on to Saturday. People can watch our preview. I think we both kind of went with mid-range type horses in that race.
All right. Well, on Saturday, I think we covered some of those early races pretty well. Craig and I are both somewhat against Gamine, going to try to beat her with Bella Sophia, and also in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. We talked about being against Golden Pal. I know, Craig, you wanted to give me the floor to talk about my long shot in that Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and maybe I'm going a little bit off the wall here, because I get that you have to jump through a few hurdles mentally to get to the horse that I picked, but that's the number 7, Charmaine's Mia. And I know that she's coming off a couple of poor efforts, and you do have to look past that somewhat, but I wouldn't so easily forget that back in January, she won that La Cienega Stakes at Santa Anita very impressively, beating, at the time, a really good horse in Jolie Olympica. And Charmaine's Mia was 16-1, first off the trainer switch to Phil D'Amato, and she just drowned that rival with a 123 TimeformUS speed figure. Now, after that, they stretched her out, and she held her form pretty well, going a mile. I think that some favorable pace scenarios led her to get that distance. I'm not sure that she really is a natural two-turn horse. She had a bit of a break. She came back in some races recently, and maybe she hasn't looked quite as good as she was back in the springtime, but you can make excuses because 2 back in the yellow ribbon at Del Mar, that was going a mile and a 16th, which I think is just pushing her to the limit. Also, she didn't break well, and they tried to rate her that day. Rating this horse in a two-turn race is just not going to be a recipe for success. Last time out, though, they did turn her back to sprinting, which I liked, but she was going down the hill in the Eddie D. She had never gone down the hill before. She was on the inside as part of a 3-way duel. They went really fast up front, a sub 43 half mile, which is fast even down the hill. And she didn't handle the dirt crossing quite as well as the winner, Lieutenant Dan, did. And she just kind of fell apart late. But aside from Lieutenant Dan, that was a race that was dominated by closers in behind. So I don't want to be too hard on Charmaine's Mia for that loss. She's come out of that with a really impressive workout recently over the training track at Santa Anita. And the fact that they're keeping the faith and running her in this race for Phil D'Amato, getting Flavien Prat aboard, there's not a ton of speed signed on. I think she'll get her preferred forward trip. So for a horse that's 30-1, there are enough things to like about her that I would want to use her prominently. And to highlight her, I put her on top and made her my best pick in this race.
Yeah, I told you yesterday when we recorded that video, you convinced me. I had kind of forgotten. She routed for so long. I forgot about that La Cienega. And when you go back and look at the chart of that race, it was a strong race. Horses came out of there to run well. Jolie Olympica went on to win another race, the 3rd place finisher. I think it was Subjective, maybe ran a big race as well, a couple starts thereafter. So, yeah, it was a really solid field, and sprinting's what she wants to do, and I'm obviously never going to criticize a 30-1 shot, but you've actually swayed me. There's no way I won't be having a few dollars on this horse.
Moving on, we pretty much covered the dirt mile earlier, talking about the pace and Life is Good. It's not a race where I think you want to get too creative with a huge price, but there are some horses that could fall into the right trips, like Silver State, and maybe some others underneath. But Craig, a race that we should probably spend a bit more time on is the Filly and Mare Turf. I know we talked about a little bit earlier, some lack of pace in the race and how that could mess with the results a little bit, but where would you be going in this race? Would you be trying to beat the favorite? I know that we maybe both highlighted some negatives about Warlike Goddess. Which of the overseas horses, if that's the direction you're going, would you be interested in?
There's actually, well, you kind of mentioned one in last year's winner, Adaria. I don't know how long she's going to be. She does seem to be getting overlooked when people talk about this race. I think she's in just as good a form last year, and it's a little bit hidden. So I think she's got a shot. One of the American horses I like in here, I know if I remember right, you're not a big fan of, but it actually wouldn't surprise me if Pocket Square ran well in here, and that's mostly because of the lack of pace in this race. I think she's going to be up close, and I think she's going to be able to finish. I don't think she's a horse who can win, but I'm going to use her in exactas and trifectas.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the weirdest thing about Pocket Square is that Chad Brown's deciding to run her in this race because based on her resume, she's just not quite grade 1 quality, but she did run that big speed figure last time and he's taking a shot, so I guess that's a good sign. And, I remember going back to Saratoga, Chad Brown had, in one of his interviews, I think with Acacia Courtney, he had made some mention to the fact that he would like to see Irad get a little bit more aggressive with Pocket Square and ride her a bit more forwardly, so this seems like the perfect opportunity to try that out with a horse that's going to be a long shot, just take a shot being a little more aggressive with her. So I left her out, Craig. You know that I'm not her biggest fan, but no, I'm not going to try to talk you off a big price. I went more logical in this race. I did pick Love's Only You, the Japanese filly on top. I'm a little bit concerned about the pace scenario for her because if you watch her races in Dubai and Japan, she's kind of a mid-pack horse. She probably has a bit more tactical speed than a runner like Warlike Goddess, but Love's Only You is going to need some things to go her way. The other Love horse, just plain old Love, she probably has more tactical speed of those overseas shippers. So, I would look at using 6, 8, and 12, Love's Only You, and Audaria, and we'll just see how the public bets the race and which of those is going to be the biggest price. Let's move on to the sprint, Craig. This is a spot where I know neither of us are trying to beat Jackie's Warrior, but behind Jackie's Warrior, if we're playing exotics in the sprint, are there any bigger prices that you'd try to get in there?
Yeah, there's going to be a couple, and you know what, if they beat me, they beat me, but I'm tossing Dr. Shivo and Following C. I didn't like the post Following C drew. I think it's going to cause problems with Jackie's Warrior to his outside. Dr. Shivo, he just hasn't run particularly fast. I know he keeps winning. He got a great post in here, and maybe he'll kind of clunk up in the second. But I'm going to use some others underneath Jackie's Warrior, who will definitely be singled alone on top. And those are the horses who are going to be coming from off the pace. I started with CZ Rocket. I thought he ran against a rail bias last time. And he's just been pretty consistent all year. He's as good as some of the others in here, and I think the pace suits him. Aloha West, I know a horse that you mentioned on the forecast, or on the preview. Kind of the same thing. He runs solid speed figures. You know he's going to be coming late. And another horse I have to throw in as a wild card because you never know what he's going to do is Lexitonian. He's going to be a big price. He's run some fast figures. I don't know what happened last time out. He didn't run at all. I know he didn't break very well, but he just was never involved. But he's a horse who has run well with multiple running styles, so I think if he finds himself in mid-pack, he could pick up some pieces as well, and he could very well be the longest shot in the field outside of maybe the Japanese horse.
No, we're pretty much on the same page with that. You know that I like Aloha West maybe a little bit more than you do to really lock in on him as maybe being the horse that finishes second behind Jackie's Warrior. But beyond him and those two, CZ Rocket I think makes sense. And I'm glad you brought up Lexitonian because I believe we both left him out of our top 4 when we did this race on the stakes preview. But like you said, he's a horse that does have races in him that can be competitive here for a minor award. And he seems to run his best when he's most disrespected, kind of like he was in the Vanderbilt and in that Churchill Downs earlier in the year. But he's got some races that make him every bit as good as some other horses that are going to be much shorter prices. And I like to refer to Jack Sisterson as the modern day giant killer because he just seems to always get these long shots to run well in big races. So yeah, he's a horse that I definitely could use in a wager like a trifecta. Moving on to the Breeders' Cup Mile, a race that I know we did a stakes preview for, Craig, but we haven't really mentioned it at all yet on this podcast. I wouldn't say that the pace scenario is that murky here because we have Smooth like Straight and Blowout. They'll sort themselves out in the front end, probably with one of the two taking the initiative. I wouldn't imagine they'll hook up too strongly. But Craig, a lot of Europeans in this race. It's pretty wide open. If you're trying to beat Space Blues, I think that there's opportunity to go for a price. Where were you landing in here?
Yeah, this was pretty easy for me because I actually picked the long shot on top, and that's the other Charlie Appleby, a Master of the Seas. No real knocks against Space Blues, but he is trying 2 turns for the first time. He's stretching out a full furlong further than he's ever been. So I don't think it's a lock that he's the best of these horses. And I liked what I saw from Master of the Seas earlier in the year, that 2,000 guineas. He ran great, getting a 119 Timeform rating. Something went amiss with him. He was laid off for a while, but I thought he came back okay at Newmarket. He ran a good race, went third. And last time out on the yielding course, it just didn't look to me like he liked that course at all. So I think he's got a shot. I love his inside draw, as I mentioned in some of these Del Mar turf races. It's not like he's a horse that drops way out of it. He's a horse who does have some pretty good tactical speed, so I give him a real shot at 12-1.
No, I think he's going to be around that price, so I wouldn't try to talk you off him. I know Charlie Appleby's been pretty bullish on the chances of Space Blues as his more fancied runner in this race, but no, there are things to like about Master of the Seas, and he's drawn that great post position down on the rail in a race where I think trips are going to be extremely important, and I allowed that to weigh in my mind too when I was making my selections in this race, because I wanted to take a different inside drawn horse, and for me, that's the number 4 Raging Bull. Look, I want every bit of that 15-1 on him because he is not trustworthy at all. I understand that, but Raging Bull has those prior performances in him that would make him a potential winner of this race, like what we saw out of him when he won that Maker's Mark mile earlier in the year. That's not the first time that he's run a speed figure in the mid-120s. He's done that throughout his career, but you just can't always rely on him to show up with that kind of effort every time. The positives for me with Raging Bull are that, well, he's drawn that inside post, so I think Irad Ortiz is going to be able to work out a great trip on him. I love where he showed on the pace projector because he does have a bit more tactical speed than his running lines might indicate. And also, I could make excuses for his last couple of races, especially at Woodbine last time, because they've brought him up to Woodbine for that Woodbine mile now 3 years in a row. He's been a short price every time. It just seems like Woodbine's not his favorite track. But he is a horse that has been shipped out to California, I think twice before, and he's won a couple of Grade 1 races. He's actually 2 for 2 in Southern California, a really impressive winner of the Kilroe Mile a couple years ago. So I think there are some things to like about Raging Bull at a big price in this race. And the other horse that I think is a little more of a stretch, but will be probably 20 or 30-1, is Casa Creed. Don't like the post position, but you can make excuses for his last 2 races. 2 back, he was wide every step of the way in that 4-star Dave, and then last time was against a slow pace at Kentucky Downs. I'm not sure that he's best going a mile, but he's a horse that's going to get overlooked in this race, and I think he's coming into it in better form than it appears.
With just one note on Raging Bull, you mentioned one of his wins in Southern California was actually over Del Mar when he won the Hollywood Derby way back when he was a 3-year-old. The other double-digit horse that I'm going to use in verticals, I don't really think he's a win contender, but it's hard for me to imagine him not being right there as they come to the wire, and that's Smooth Like Straight. He's just got that good tactical speed. I imagine he's going to sit off a blowout. I think he's a little better than her. And I imagine he's going to lead with a furlong to go. So he's going to be one who I think will hang around for a minor share.
Craig, I think we covered the distaff pretty well, so let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Turf, a race that we talked about a little bit with regard to the potential pace duel on the front end with True Mouvant and Acclimate, and we did say that's likely to help Tarnawa, the favorite, quite a bit. But is there anybody else in here that you think might benefit from a fast pace, or if they go quickly up front and could get into the mix at a bigger price? I know there's a long shot. Well, I don't know if it's a long shot, but a bigger priced horses that I'm interested in. Is there anybody else that you would like in this race?
Yeah, well, in our preview, the horse I picked second is actually 15-1 on the morning line, and our loyal Pacecast and Forecast listeners will probably be surprised because I know we both were down on Rock Emperor most of the year before he was able to somehow win the Hearse last time out of nowhere. He seemed to be in pretty rough form. We even joked about him being used, Tribuvan being used as a rabbit for him and then beating him and saying he was the better horse. But I really liked what I saw from Rock Emperor last time. It wasn't the strongest field we're going to see, but I think the removal of blinkers really made a difference with him. I think he's got a good inside post draw in here. It's not hugely important at the 1.5-mile distance, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And I just wonder if he's going to get the early jump on some of these Euros that we see in here who tend to come from the back.
It's kind of funny. Chad Brown has a lot of horses on this Breeders' Cup. Horses that might not look like they're at the top of their divisions, but are coming into the race in good form. And Chad's kind of giving them that vote of confidence that he's deciding to run in these races. So, I mean, it feels like Rock Emperor could be one of those horses for him, obviously, with domestic spending being his top hope in this race. And Craig, I know you're also interested in another big price, the number 8 Broom. He's 20 to 1 on the morning line and is definitely the kind that could make a trifecta if he gets in there for third.
Yeah, he's one I kind of dismissed the arc last time. He obviously just didn't handle the ground, and I kind of forgot to mention this on the preview, so hopefully people are listening to this one. I really like that Frankie Dettori takes the mount. I mean, he had some choice. I would imagine he had a choice to ride another horse, for example, Walton Street, who he rode in the Canadian International for Charlie Appleby, but he actually opted for Broom. Now, maybe he's committed to Eden O'Brien. I'm not really sure, but I like him in there. I think his race 2 back at Longchamp in the Pre-Foy was really good, and I think 20 to 1 would just be ridiculous on this horse. I think he's much better than that.
Yeah, the long shot that I'm interested in, or the pair of them, the one that's more logical would be my top pick, and the horse that I'm trying to beat Tarnawa with, that's the number 12, Teona. She's a 3-year-old filly who just seems like she's coming into this race in top form and might be even improving out of her last victory, and that's kind of the strategy that I'm going with in this Breeders' Cup Turf. I want the younger horses that might be stepping up to beat Tarnawa, because I think the ones that we've seen a lot of already, it's kind of established for me that they're not quite good enough to beat Tarnawa. A horse like Walton Street, I don't really view him as the one that's going to cause the upset. So Teona, that 3-year-old filly, she beat Snowfall in the Prix Vermeil last time when Snowfall might not have been at her best. But I mean, it's not like Snowfall completely fell apart at the end of the year. She came back and was a decent 6th in the Arc after that. And Teona, she was a commanding winner of that race over that heavy favorite. And this is a horse they had really high hopes for early on. Obviously, her campaign got somewhat derailed when she ran so poorly over soft ground in the Epsom Oaks behind Snowfall early in the year, but seems like she's come on since then. She loves firm ground. That's why they're running here instead of the Arc. So I just think she's interesting. And like we were talking about on our stakes preview, Craig, sometimes with these 3-year-old fillies, the time form ratings that you see in the TimeformUS PPs, it might underrate them a little bit. We saw it with Enable when she came over here as, I believe, a 4-year-old, but some of her 3-year-old numbers were just a little bit less than what you might expect for a horse with that kind of stature. So I'm not going to be surprised if Teona is able to bridge the gap and that time form rating deficit between her and Tarnawa.
Yeah, I was going to make that same point. That's the one weakness, I think, with the time form ratings when we convert them over. For some reason, they just always seem to be a bit underrated to me. I've noticed that throughout Breeders' Cups for years. I'm not sure what we can do to fix that. Probably something I'll analyze in the off-season, which for me is basically after the Breeders' Cup until the first of the year. So something worth taking a look at, but I'm totally with you. I wouldn't judge her as a 112 type horse like that time form rating says.
Yeah, I just also want to mention my 4th pick in this race, who's a double-digit price, the number 10, Yabir. I just think it's interesting. I mean, Charlie Appleby, you know that he can win in the U.S. And his go-to rider, his top stable rider, William Buick, chooses to ride Yabir over Walton Street, which I think is meaningful. And this is a horse that I know they had really high hopes for early in the season, and it seems like maybe now he's putting it all together. So I think Yabir is an interesting horse as a deep closer in this race, because if the pace does heat up on the front end, he could be another one that benefits from that situation. Craig, we touched upon the Classic quite a bit, but let's just close things out by revisiting it one more time. I know we're both against Knicks Go, you probably a little bit more so than I am. If there was a horse, since we do have the same exact here, you can see it on our stakes preview, just in different order, the 2 3-year-olds, Hot Rod Charlie and Essential Quality. But since you're against Knicks Go, if there was a bigger price that you might try to get into the trifecta underneath, who would it be?
There's, I guess, maybe a couple. One would be a horse you mentioned in Tripoli. I just think he had everything against him last time. He was a horse who, it was a good rail day, and he never sniffed the rail at any point in the race. He had run really well over this surface in the Pacific Classic. Pardon me. I don't think he's any threat to the top 2 whatsoever, the 3-year-olds, but I do think he's one that could pick up pieces, and one who's not quite as long, at least on the morning line. I'm not convinced this horse won't be more of a long shot. That could benefit from what would be a really hot pace is Max Player. And it might sound kind of funny because he's a horse who has blossomed as he stayed close to the paces last couple times. He was able to win the Suburban and the Jockey Club Gold Cup. But honestly, I don't think they were true grade 1 races. I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with the speed in here. But he's a horse in the past who was able to come from well off the pace and run some nice races. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was able to get up to 3rd and 4th if they don't press him too early trying to stay close.
Yeah, I'm interested in one of those two horses, like you said, Tripoli, who I made a little bit of a case for in our stakes preview. Again, not a horse that I view as a win candidate, strictly underneath, but like you said, he was against the track last time. He ran well over this course too back in the Pacific Classic. I think the 1.25 miles is right up his alley. And the rider switch to Arad Ortiz, let's just say it's not a negative. So I think there are some things pointing in Tripoli's direction to maybe get a minor award in this Breeders' Cup Classic at what should be right around or higher than that 15-1 morning line. Well, Craig, that's all the Breeders' Cup action. I'd say we covered things pretty well. We kind of did it in a roundabout way, but I know we touched upon a lot of horses and a lot of races. And at this point, I know much of our work is done, and we'll just be looking forward to appreciating these races this upcoming weekend because there are a lot of matchups that I know both of us are looking forward to.
Yeah, hopefully we gave out some good ideas. And as always for horse players, I like to get the work done early and have my opinions and then just track the tote board. I try not to get too set on the bets I'm going to make until you see the odds. One good thing about the Breeders' Cup, we know we're going to have huge pools. There's not going to be giant fluctuations as they break or, just before as they're loading. So just a great day of racing, great day for bettors, and even the races I don't have any strong opinions in. I think they're just fun races to watch. I'm looking forward to some really good performances. And as a speed figure guy, there's no 2 days I like more, especially Saturday, than getting to sit down and make the speed figures for the Breeders' Cup.
And I definitely look forward to talking about those speed figures with you next week, as we will be recording our TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday, and we'll be, of course, recapping all 14 of these Breeders' Cup races, so make sure to look for that next week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll be back next week with our Breeders' Cup recap.